Hey, everyone. Last week we talked about the concept of prototyping, right? Which is, basically we can set up a pre-production idea of what we're trying to build before we actually do any large amount of coding. We kind of talked about some of the elements, including like a sketch, a wireframe, style tile, what we call a paper prototype. Um, a mock-up, an interactive mock-up, a low fidelity prototype, right? And we talked about a wireframe last week. Today we're going to talk more about style tiles and about a mock-up. And I'll even show you guys how to do like an interactive mock-up. So, what is a style tile? You've talked about wireframing and how that's kind of about layout. It's layout over content and even over design. So it's like we're not worried about what things look like, what color it is, what font it is. We're just worried about where things go, right? That's kind of the point of a wireframe. A style tile is design over everything else. In other words, like it doesn't matter where things are. It doesn't even matter if it works. It's really just like, what does it look like? You know what I mean? And the way I like to think of a style tile, my wife and I are currently trying to reupholster a couch, and you get a bunch of samples, right? This is a bunch of fabric samples. And the idea is you look at your samples and you're like, okay, this is what the couch would look like with this material or that material. Or you guys might have, if you ever gone to paint a room and you went to Home Depot, they have little paper swatches, right? That's kind of what a style tile is. Okay. We live in a world where a lot of projects, they're not always going to look exactly the same in all situations. What do I mean by that? Well, let's just even go to SF State's website, right? Here's SF State's website. Oops. So this is how it looks like on my computer, which is a desktop, right? But if you were looking at it like this, which is like a smartphone or a tablet, the design changes, right? Like it kind of adds some elements and it subtracts some elements, right? You guys can see how that changes where like this went away. Um, or actually I should say it moved down. So if you know anything about web development and 228, you might want to look into that. But my point here is that like gone are the days where like everything always looked exactly the same because we have so many devices and platforms. And by platforms, I mean, how does it look on a Mac? How does it look on Windows? That kind of thing. Or an iPhone versus Android, where it's like instead of worrying about exactly how many pixels something is or exactly what color it is, let's just get the general idea of what something the general visual style of something. And so that's the point of the style tile, to kind of lay out like colors, typography, general ideas. So the idea is here is like if I was doing, say, City College's website, like these are possible colors you would find. Now, whether it's in a background or a font color or whatever, it doesn't really matter. But the point is like these are the type of colors we might see. These are the type of fonts we might see, right? This is like an example of what a header might look like. This is an example of what a subheading might look like. This is what some body text might look like. Once again, it doesn't matter where on the website it is, whether it's on the home page or some other page. It's like the idea is that this in general is what it will look like, right? You may want to show some examples of what interactivity looks like. Excuse me. That might mean like, you know, uh, showing like a hover effect or some other interaction kind of thing. Okay. The term style tile came up by a woman named Samantha Toy Warren as sort of displaying visual language. You can kind of visit the website she created for this and view it. I just want to go over some ideas before we even do a style tile. So a lot of style tiles is thinking about visuals, right? What colors, what fonts, that kind of thing. Let's talk a little bit about the interactivity of or the color theory of interactivity, which means like people tend to associate certain colors with certain things. So for instance, like red. Red is typically associated with like confidence and youth and power. Orange is usually associated with like being friendly, being energetic. This has to do with like warm colors versus cool colors. Yellow is typically associated with happiness and optimism. Keep in mind that these are all cultural based, which means what one culture considers a color may not necessarily be what all cultures consider. For instance, in Western culture, white is usually seen as calm or, clean. In some Asian cultures, white is seen as death. And so giving someone like a white rose or something would be considered bad because that's a sign of death, as opposed to the Western culture where that's not that indication. So just keep in mind that like all color, there's a cultural aspect here that I'm not really talking about or going super in depth with, but that might relate to whatever culture you're making your project for. Green is associated with peace and health. Blue is typically associated with trust, security. Purple is typically associated with luxuriousness and creativity. Black is typically related or associated with being reliable or sophisticated. And like I said, at least in Western cultures, white is usually seen as calm or clean. So just kind of showing you some examples here. So it's like, okay, blue typically associated with trust and security. Here's Citibank, right? Citibank's main color is blue, right? Blue in the title, blue in their cards, blue in the sign-on button here. Now, grant, and if you think about it, a bank is something that requires a lot of trust, right? You have to give them your information, like your credit card and, your bank account information, all this kind of very sensitive stuff, right? You want to trust the bank, the website you're going to, right, before you start giving it all your personal information. Same here with the Employment Development Agency or department, the EDD. They handle things like employment and that kind of stuff. Once again, you're typically going to have to give them information that might relate it to like your social security number or other kind of sensitive information. And that requires trust. And so like, you can see here that they're using a lot of elements of blue. And I think that was a conscious choice to kind of, reinforce the idea of trust. Red, confidence, youth, power. Okay. Here in this, like, ad for pizza, it's like, boom, red right in your face, right? Cheese it, boom, 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 boom. Look at this, $5. Okay. Back when $5 could buy you something. So this is like, they're trying to use red here as kind of an attention grabber. It's confident, it's in your face, you know what I mean? Tinder, Tinder, obviously related to romance. Romance is typically associated with red, like red hearts and things like that. Not always, but a lot of times, So they're kind of invoking that, also invoking kind of youth and confidence. White, clean, simple, sophisticated, right? Apple is kind of the king of using white and light gray for everything. Here's BMW, where it's like, black, white, black being sophisticated, white being clean and, modern typically. Here's some ideas when it comes to um, interactivity of buttons, right? So you guys have been working with HTML and making buttons with A tags, and we just learned, you guys will be learning how to do HTML buttons using JavaScript. Um, Oops, I don't know why I can't. Anyway. There's actually, when it comes to making buttons that people are more likely going to interact with, there's actually some elements that can come into play. All right, I wanted to talk about some design theory. So here's just a little theory when it comes to getting people to interact with buttons. Okay. So you guys have made buttons, when it comes to, your websites and things, and you're learning, we can add JavaScript to make things interactive. If you have two buttons like this, um, which, if you were to give this to 100 people, who's more likely to interact with it, right? Like which one are you more likely to click? The answer is actually this one. Okay, more people are likely to click on this. I've done this in the class where I tell people to raise their hand and all that sort of stuff. And essentially what happens is that, this one has more contrast. When something has more contrast to it, people are much, even though the text is the text is the same size, the button are the same size, all that kind of stuff, you're more likely going to click on this one because there's more contrast in it. All right. Once again, I have two buttons here, and I just want you to think to yourself before I say anything, which one would you be more likely to click on? The one on the left or the one on the right? I'll give you a second while I drink my drink. The answer is this one, the one on the left. Not everyone. I've done this before, and usually it's like a 2/3, 70, 75, 25 split, 3/4, 1/4 split. The reason why most people typically choose that one is because there's a lot of extra space. Okay. This one feels very cramped. And when you have, when you have buttons that are very cramped, people kind of get this icky feeling, like it just feels, unprofessional and not real. And you know what I mean? So people feel more confident when the buttons can kind of breathe a little bit more. All right. Of this one, which one's more likely to click on? The one on the left or the one on the right? I want you to think about it for a second. The answer, of course, is most like when I've done this in class, it's like 99% or almost 100. Almost everyone chooses this one. Okay. When something is clear, it's much easier to look at than say this one. Okay. So in other words, like if something is slightly blurry or obscured or something like that, people are much less likely to want to interact with that. All right. So all these things can affect, how work with colors and such. All right. So we're talking about the whole idea is we're talking about style tiles, and let's build a style tile together. Okay. So what I'm going to do is load up Figma. I gave it to you as Figma. You can also open this in Illustrator if you prefer Illustrator. So what I'm going to do is import. I gave you guys a Figma file that you guys can work with in the files from today, which is style tile. If you want to open up the AI file there for like Illustrator people, that's cool with me. Okay. Oops, where'd it go? There it is. So this is kind of like a good starting place template. Okay. By all means, you don't have yours doesn't have to look like this. I prefer if it didn't. I prefer if you didn't just copy mine. But like, let's just kind of look how this might be. Okay. So it's like up here, this is the name of the company or the product. These are possible colors. I really recommend that you put in like hexadecimal values, especially if it's like a website or something. These are the type of textures. Textures are like, stripes, or if there's like a more pattern kind of idea. Image colors, buttons, interactive buttons. What would they look like? Maybe there's like a hover color, which is like what this is trying to show. This is what your text might look like. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. Let's pretend that we are setting up style tiles. So now normally what I do is I like have people I break people into groups, and each group gets a different sort of like fake company here. You could choose one of your own. I'm just going to work with I don't know, this one. So the company is called Photon, and they make wearable computers, kind of like, smartwatches kind of thing. And this is kind of how they want the website to feel. It should feel very techy, very future, cool, elite. You know what I mean? Now, of course, culturally, what does that mean? That can mean a lot of things. What was cool and techy 15 years ago, maybe not, is what it is now. Times and things change. And the way music changes, fashion changes, whatever. In the same way, design changes. What colors are hip now are going to be different than what they are 20 years ago. that kind of thing. So, obviously things are subjective and can change with culture too. Not everyone's culture is exactly the same. So what is, cool in America may not be cool in another country, or vice versa. What's cool in one country may not be cool in America. So just keep that aware. So all right, I'm trying to come up with like a tech company here, right? I don't know. Maybe I'm gonna. This is just Figma. Figma, you can just use fill, and I'm just gonna kind of look through colors, and I kind of want like, maybe like a nice dusty blue here. I don't know. You can kind of play around with colors. Maybe I really like this kind of dusty, kind of aqua color. And I'm gonna be honest. I'm gonna come in here just kind of label this. I always say that, if you're setting up a style tile, especially if you're going to work with other people, it's very good to sort of label things so that, and part of that reason is you may not necessarily be the developer. So your style tile, your mock-up might be headed off to somebody else. They may not necessarily be that strong in design, so they don't necessarily know how to sample colors or stuff that maybe you know how to do. So it's always useful to kind of like lay out the key colors, lay out the names of the fonts and that kind of stuff, in my humble opinion. So I might go, okay, here's the color for this, just so that in case I pass it off to someone. Now, does your client really care with the hexadecimal? I doubt they care, but more like if you're passing it off to developer, they're like, oh, thanks. Now I don't have to like ask you in an email how to figure it out. So like, I don't know. Let's do another one. Tech companies always kind of like nice blues, I feel like. Uh, Maybe they want like a nice cadet kind of blue. I kind of like that one. Okay. Not everything in my is gonna be blue. Maybe some of it's gonna be white, right? Like text or other elements. I already know that that's gonna be F F F F F F. I feel like tech companies always like dark grays, but not blacks. They like grays. They're very different in that. So maybe like something like this. Okay. Let me get one more blue. Hmm. I don't know. Nah, it's too blue. I don't know. I don't. None of these are just. I don't have a like. I can't tell you. I can't give you my way of choosing colors. I just have to feel it. I know that sounds meta and crunchy and all that, but that's just how I do it. Yeah, I kind of like that one. Really like that cadet kind of blue. So all right. So those are some colors. Maybe just for the sake of argument, buttons are going to be, maybe they're white when you put cursor over them. And then when you put your cursor on top, it's like, kind of like a light gray, or maybe there's a gray with like a little bit of blue in it, like this, you know, something like that. Company images, I'm not gonna do like a whole bunch of images just for the sake of this video not taking half past forever, but you guys can go to many places online and look for photos or tech. I don't know. That's too matrixy. I feel like I don't know. I feel like you'd see something more like and I feel like it'd be like a person in like a gray back. Yeah, kind of like this. It's not the greatest, but something like this, or something like. I'm just gonna download this. Obviously, I'd probably want to spend a little bit more time, but yeah, I like this one too. Something about it just feels very modern, you know. All right. So let's say this is the kind of photo that might be on, now is it exactly this photo? Probably not, but something like it, kind of that standard product shot against a solid background, looking all hip and cool. What I'm going to do is under company images, let's import that image. Okay. Now, at the moment, it's not inside of the element here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually place this image above this. Okay. I want this image to fill this up. So what we're actually going to do is use the backing here as actually like a mask. Okay. You know what a mask is? A mask hides part of something. So the way it works in Figma is when you use something as a mask, you can only apply this to vectors. Okay. So just be aware of that. It'll go upward and anything directly above it will be placed inside. So what I'm going to do is click on this. I'm going to use as mask. And you can see that it does that. Okay. And you can see what's happening here is it's actually, you can see the little arrow. So that's the mask symbol, kind of like what you might see in Adobe Photoshop. And it's applying to this. Okay. Now, if you want to remove your mask, you can right click, remove mask, and then kind of goes back to where it was. Use as mask. Oops, no, wrong one. I want to use this as mask. Okay. Maybe I'm going to bring in that other image. So I'm going to go down here under the basic shapes, choose the image. Let's bring in that other one. Okay, so kind of want this, place this here and use as mask. Okay. Textures is kind of the same idea. I'd find some images that are not image in the sense of like, not images like, a woman wearing a watch, but more like just textures. I don't know what kind of textures I might have. You don't have to have textures. Digital textures. I don't know. None of these are really kind of, maybe something like this. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe something like that. I don't know. Download this bad boy. It's not quite the texture I would want, but I don't know. Let's bring that in. The point of this, like I said, is it doesn't really matter where it is in your final product. The idea is that, you're going to have this. So I'm just going to place that here. That is inside of textures. So let's place that above texture one and make that a mask. And then I get kind of that. Okay. Over here, this is where I'd kind of sample the text. I'm highlighting and you can see under typography here, so I can go through. Now, these are all actually Google fonts. If you don't want to use, or if you want to use fonts that are not Google fonts, you're actually going to, if you're using the mobile version, there is a way actually to do that. But basically you have to install like a little plugin that'll let you do that, but there is a way to do it. But I'm just going to use the built-in ones for now, or the Google Fonts for now. So all of these can be found via Google Fonts, if you know what that is. And we'll actually talk about that later. But it doesn't have some of your standards like, like Helvetica or something. But let's just say for the sake of argument, I like Hebo, and I want Hebo 36. So just like with colors, it's always a good idea to kind of like label stuff. So I'm going to call this Hebo, oh, wrong one. It should be here. Hebo. All right. This is regular, so this is the size. So if if this is the color, so this is, black. If I did something other than black, or if I did bold, I might want to label that there. So if I was like, okay, headings are always going to actually be bold or semi-bold, I might put that in here, semi-bold, just so that like people who might be working on this later just know this information, right? I'm going to go in the body text. And maybe I'm also going to set, let's also set this to Hebo. Okay, this is set to 14, so pretty good. I'm going to call this Hebo 14. I think it is just regular. 14 by 18. 18, this is typographical shorthand. This is the line height, which is currently set to 18. All right. So, and if I have like a subheading, like, I don't know, maybe there's going to be a subheading. I'm just going to, which would mean it's like smaller than this, but bigger than this. I'm just going to move all this down. Let's say it's something like this, where it's a little bit smaller. This is Hebo semi-bold 24. Not all right. And that's, this is my style tile. I also really recommend that you have kind of adjectives that kind of describe, you know, what the project is meant to be, because the idea is that, what one person, sometimes it's less about, exact colors. Like it doesn't matter if it's like blue or off blue or whatever. It's more about creating a vibe, right? And what is that vibe? Well, here the vibe that we're told is it's like, okay, it's supposed to be futuristic, elite, like a fancy Apple style thing, right? So it's like, okay, elite is one of the adjectives, advanced maybe, or futuristic, whatever term you want to use. Now, what is futuristic? That kind of changes. Like I said, what is considered futuristic now is very different than what was futuristic in 1950s and 60s. Go back and watch an old sci-fi movie, and what they considered futuristic was way different, right? So it's like the concept of what that looks like changes, and it could change the colors or the textures or whatever. But it's like, okay, this is the general vibe we're going for. Um, cool. I don't know what other, sophisticated, expensive, luxurious, maybe. If it's like an Apple, Apple products, they try to give off the impression of like they're sophisticated, they're luxurious, right? Uh, you know, these are some adjectives. And then it's like, okay, and this is my company. It's called Photon, I believe. So I put that there. Okay. So what I'm going to do is you can export this by, if you're in Figma, highlight the frame as a whole and go to export. And you can export this as an image or a JPEG. I'm just going to export this as an image. Okay. And then the idea is like, well, we could use this with a design we already have. So for instance, well, here's what I'm going to do. I have a little file that I gave you called fictitious business. Okay. So it's like, whatever, whether you did Photon or you decided to do, one of the other ones here, like, Active Pro or Java Hut or Sunshine or whatever your, whatever company you decided to do a style tile for, whatever fonts you chose, whatever colors you chose, whatever visual interactions you chose. we can take that and apply it to something. So it's like, all right, here's what I'm going to do. I gave you guys a file, and you can just go to import, and it's called fictitious business. Okay. And it's just a standard kind of layout that pretty much any, site could have, right? But it's like, okay, well, why don't we use the colors and everything, the style tile to affect it? So it's like, well, okay, I'm going to bring in that style tile. And let's use this. It's like, all right, well, we said we kind of want to use, these colors here. I'm going to use this kind of cadet blue. So sample that color. Okay. And then we said we might want to, and maybe, I don't know, let's go in here, click on the fill. I'm going to sample that green color. And I'm going to go, okay, maybe we need to use the white. Okay. So I'm just kind of using, all of the same thing here. Let's use that sample. Okay. This is like, this is where like an image might be. So it's like, all right, I'm just going to bring in one of those images that we used, you know. Okay. And this is like this is like a slideshow. So this kind of indicates what, you know, oops, what color. So maybe like, I don't know, let's use that. All right. And then it's like, okay, well, we know what font we're supposed to be using, Kibo. So this is kind of body text. We've already said it should be 1418. So Kibo 14 and 18. Okay. Same thing here. Kibo 14, 18. Okay. So, like, the point of this is we are taking our style tile and kind of applying it just to kind of see what it might look like, right? Now, this could have been for any colors. If you did another one, like if you did the Active Pro and it's meant to be like this healthy, you'd probably have like a lot of greens and browns. Like you could do the same thing, just like this becomes green, this becomes brown. You know what I mean? You change, maybe use a serif font instead of a sans serif. But the point here is like we're kind of taking our thing and applying it just to see how it looks. You know what I mean? And if I decide later, you know what, this isn't quite working. Like in my head, it kind of looked good, but right now it's just, it's not, I'm not feeling it. Well, maybe you might want to go back to your style tile and make some adjustments to it. All right. So why don't you guys try that out? That was just practice of using the style tile.